Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Evil. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, the new assessment they're going through is they're meeting with a doctor, a guy who helps basically unbrainwash people who are connected to cults. But this guy, Owen, turns out Owen is maybe possessed. And the guy's like, I don't really believe in all of this stuff, but now I'm kind of believing with my own eyes. So they go to see him, which obviously this isn't our team's first time dealing with anything related to potential possession. And, well, I mean, they dealt with it. Literally last episode, granted, that was all clout chasing, but still. All that, plus, I mean, they've dealt with possession cases beforehand, too, and obviously that was kind of wasn't that season 1, the big disagreement between, season 1, when, both David and Kristen had a very different perspective on what was what seemed to be a possession case, the lady that would eventually sue them for it, that whole situation, right? So, interestingly enough, obviously, David's kind of like, all right, well, let's see if there's someone possessing this. And Kristen's coming at it from a doctor. He needs medical attention. He looks dehydrated. It's like, we're giving him water like every 20 minutes. And he's like, dude, I am an actual medical doctor, not just like from a psychological standpoint, a psychologist or someone who's, it's like, no, I'm a legitimate medical doctor. The parents gave me, or I think the grandparents gave me permission, or whoever gave me permission to do all this, to hold him here because he's acting wild. He was part of a cult called Yeshua, which I think it's interesting. I find it, because Yeshua means Jesus. I went into this knowing that, which, not for nerdy reasons, not for religious reasons, but for nerdy reasons. Technically nerdy / religious reasons, it's because there's a video game called Xenosaga. It's a JRPG which has massive religious overtones. I mean, it's not even like they hide. It's like, as a kid, I don't think I recognized some of it. Now, in retrospect, I'm older, I'm like, oh, the entire thing is a giant science fictional metaphor for, religion. Spoilers, one of the characters, his real name is Yeshua. And that's how I found out, Yeshua means Jesus. Once again, I think correct me if I'm wrong. I know is it Hebrew that Yeshua means Jesus? I think. I don't know. Or is it Yeshua supposed to be Jesus' real name or something like that? I don't know. I haven't played the game in years, so I don't remember, and I don't know even the game even covered all that. But regardless, it's actually one of my favorite characters that they named, who ended up being the Jesus metaphor. Not even metaphor, literally ended up being Jesus. It's a whole thing. But he ended up being kind of my favorite character just because I'm not about to bore you with all the details about it. I highly recommend, if you've never looked into it, look into it. It's really fascinating, actually. But that's when I'm meeting her, Yeshua. I was like, why does that sound familiar? I was like, oh, because of Xenosaga? It's like, yeah, that's the only reason why. Once again, nerdy and slightly religious reasons why I know that. That's funny. Regardless. What I thought was so surprising is when they showed up there, I've never seen the movie, but it definitely gives it Midsummer vibes. It definitely does. To be fair, I guess that's any cult definitely gives off those vibes. So, I love that Ben ended up running into someone he knew. And it's from the science thing, it's that his sister introduced him to and everything, that he met with those people. They ended up helping him, cause he met with one last episode. She runs that company that app is based on, right? Other than that, it was interesting. And I think this ended up being this fascinating thing where it is that religion meets science conversation, because Ben is agnostic. He's not religious. He's a very science-based guy, but he's with someone, Renee, who is very science-based, but also is very religious at the same time too. Because at first they're like, oh, this must be the leader. But she's like, oh, no, you were trying to flirt with Jesus or something like that. Because she's actually Yeshua. And you're like, huh. And she brings up that interesting conversation of all right, there's a movie with someone that had love and hate as tattoos. I'm like, I have to look that up afterwards. Because I'm like, that sounds so familiar, but I don't know what movie she's referencing. But she's saying nowadays that love and hate coming together would be not, the metaphor clash of love and hate is now replaced with religion and science. And I was like, very true. Once again, some people can't accept both sides of it. Some people can't. Once again, it's just it's kind of a giant metaphor, like obviously like Kristen and David's relationship, at least in the beginning, they've kind of found a middle ground, but from the very beginning it was always kind of like a metaphor for like the world state of like science versus religion. I mean, obviously like Ben's in the mix of that as well too, but because he comes from the situation of his family is super religious, he isn't. He lost his faith, but yeah, Ben gets close to Renee, and she's like, oh, like, explain this particular thing. And he was like, okay. And she tried to put, like, a religious spin on it. And he was like, actually, that doesn't make sense. But she's like, oh, put your hand in mine. And you're like, okay. She seems normal enough. If I felt like, when you look at it, I was like, I thought there was something weird, because I was like, isn't her hand, like, extremely moist? It looks like her hand is super sweaty. I was like, that seemed interesting, but maybe that, I don't know, her hand was glistening. It seemed like, oh, you're extra sweaty? That's what I was almost like, is there something on your palm that's going to do something to Ben? Doesn't seem like it. At first, it seemed like, oh, he was having a good time, and then when she was making all those jokes about the blood sacrifice, I'm like, this is going to turn into that, isn't it? It's like, it's every cult. Hey, drag you in, and it's like, hey, find someone, which, yes, that's always the thing, too. If a cult, it's like, yeah, you might think, like, oh, I'm too smart. Like, because you're always going to think, like, how did someone get tricked in that? When you're in a vulnerable enough space, people saying something, kind of giving you answers, making you feel better when maybe you haven't been feeling good at all. Of course, a cult's going to be to drag you in. But I'm sure even Ben was almost like, okay, he sees this as kind of bullshit. He doesn't believe it. He's just kind of like, and like him and Renee are doing their thing. And she's like, okay, yeah, like when the bells start tolling or just noises start going on, she's like, okay, like, don't freak out, but there's going to be blood. He's like, what, my blood? And she's just like, he's like, wait, what's going on? And he's like, are you going to sacrifice me? Is that for real? And so she ends up turning into Yeshua. It turns into a whole sequence, and you're just like, okay. And so it's about people confessing their sins. Like, one of them confessed to killing her mother, but it wasn't her. It was like, no, like, it was guilt she carried over killing her mom, in a sense of she was born in the birthing process. Her mom died. Which is such a, like, horrible thing, like, because obviously I think that could lead to a whole bunch of, like, guilt on its own, because it's like, right, she has some guilt on it, like, oh, I killed my mother, you never know, like, her father could be throwing that in her face, like, oh, you're the one that killed a woman I love, I've watched a few things where that's come up, and that's just, like, a horrible, that adds trauma upon it, but Renee also knows about Ben's guilt over his mom, which, I want to say it was last season. I don't think his mom came up at all in season 1, maybe, because there was the whole stuff about, like, his dad wanting him to come over, or it was something, his dad wanting him to come to church or be more religious, and his sister is religious, and she was trying to convince him to, like, do it, but it's like, I'm not going to become more religious just because dad asked me to. But I want to say it was last season that we saw, like, he saw his mom, and there was, like, a dream sequence or something like that, if I remember correctly. But to kind of touch on that even more now, like, maybe that deep down, that's always been some part of Ben. It's like, bro, I broke her heart, and he believed his mom died because of that. And he's like, even if that was, I don't think it's going to get resolved by me crawling around on the floor and beating myself with a stick. And they're just like all making these noises and stuff. And he's just kind of like, all right, guys, come on, Renee, this isn't science. This is some cult shit. Come on, snap out of it. And yeah. He doesn't get hurt. In fact, he gets covered in blood, and they're like, what? Yeah, he's like, yeah, they kind of cut open a goat and spilled its blood on me. For what? He's like, religious reasons. And I'm like, and he just walks away kind of laughing. I'm like, what's Ben going to look like going forward? It's like, also, it's like, Ben, you have the worst luck with women. It's like everything with the twin situation for the past 2 seasons, and now this. It's like, dude, you can't catch a break. Like, also, it's like, once again, this is also the season you finally hit your mental, like, roadblock where you're just like, fuck it. You were literally having a nervous breakdown because of all the shit that was left unresolved. Like, yeah, we just move on to the next case. So that in conjunction with this experience, like, are we going to find out Ben's going to be more religious? Like, I don't know whether he was kind of like, religion, ha ha ha, or is he just kind of like, religion, I always knew it was crazy bullshit, and like, look at this. So I don't know how to interpret that laugh, chuckle, and just strolling away with blood covered in blood. You're like, that's definitely going to be interesting. But kind of on the tail end of things, there was a girl, Lily, who, even she, which is interesting considering all that you're a part of, you're like, oh, saying that when David's like, oh, we think Owen's possession, she's like, that's bullshit crazy. I'm like, you're part of a cult. What are you talking about? But maybe she believes the cult's BS too. I don't know. But she was able to reach out to Owen, so she was telling him to fight it, but it's like, was he actually possessed, or What? I don't know. She was able to reach him in a way that the exorcism and process could. Don't know what to fully make of that. Are we fully done with that? Once again, it's just that thing of, well, this was that case. Moving along, but it's not resolved. Shut up and move along. And it just might be just another one of those cases of like, maybe we'll eventually circle back, because everything is interconnected. It's all part of a larger puzzle, but they're just isolated things that maybe they won't have their personal resolutions, but you never know. It could come back at the end of the season, or maybe in season 4. Like, you never know how they might tie some of these storylines back up. Once again, that Angel thing was season 1. They brought it back and kind of gave a scientific explanation for like what happened and everything. So, well, not even just a scientific, it was more of a technological thing, but it kind of falls under science, so still. So there's all of that. Then there's David's situation with the entity, but we're not the entity. We're friends of the blah 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 shop. They want, the moment they were like, hey, you're going to be invited over to dinner, and when you go in, I want you to go to like a bathroom, excuse yourself to the bathroom, and go into a child's room. And you're like, I was immediately like, is this about Alexis? Is this about Kristen's family? Immediately after I'm thinking that, yeah, it's like, I'm surprised he even didn't, kind of had no choice, because like the moment you show up, I mean, the fact is, he even gave you that full warning, being like, yeah, it's Kristen. Kristen's going to invite you over. Go into Alexis's room, put this down. It's like, oh, because you're going to spy on her? It's like, yeah, that fertility clinic, which you and I, we all know, because you guys investigated in season 1, that has ties to, like, some demonic shit. They're raising evil. She's being groomed to essentially take over one of the sigils. Which I'm like, I wonder, is it specifically like a thing of, like, she needs to be corrupted? Because was it always predetermined that it was going to be her throne, or do they need to corrupt her to meet certain conditions? Like, example I'm going to make is like Supernatural. To release Lucifer from his cage, 66 of the 666 seals, I believe, in total, 66 of them needed to be broken. That was like the special condition. That's why I'm wondering, like, it can't just be like, oh, like, you have to, it's not even just like a cannibalism thing of like, oh, you ate the predecessor, now you got the throne. Either it's just like a thing of no one currently holds the throne of that particular family of demons, or that sigil or whatever, because they were even like, the entity was like, yo, this sigil is so much more important than like 20 others. So it's like, did all this have to be for the purpose of, yes, grooming her for the, because she has to be, like, she's middle ground. Yes, like, the evil is awakening, or it's at least there to some extent. So, could it be that they needed to corrupt her before she's ready? Or was it just kind of like, yeah, the groundwork's already laid, we just got to push her in that direction? I'm curious, like, I think it's all kind of the same thing. Whether it's just predetermined, or whether it's like they kind of have to push her in that direction. I think it's all kind of interconnected. But regardless, David, not too keen on that idea. But we did have that situation where, like, they're playing the game where it's like, okay, like, you know, you wink, someone winks, you get killed, and once you're killed, you can't say anything. So it's almost like a little bit of a game of Mafia, interestingly enough. And it came to, I was thinking like, oh, is it going to be David? But it's like, of course, why would I even think it was anyone other than Lexus? You know, so, and she's really good at it. She's got this demon, like, she's got this, like, there's always just, like, everything's a little sinister when it comes to Alexis. You can't, there's always going to have that sinister connotation to it, like anything that she does. But they found out, like, oh, there's still plumbing issues. Didn't you? Yeah, they came in here, but they had the wrong equipment. It took them 20 minutes. And David was like, motherfuckers came here and pretended to be the plumbing. Which I feel like they should have actually done. I mean, they're not actual plumbers, so it's them in disguise. But, like, there's something demonic with the piping and shit like that. I mean, I guess they wanted to keep an eye on the house, specifically Lexus, and maybe they would have found out about the plumbing too. I don't know. Maybe they eventually will, but I'm like, we as the audience know, yeah, some demonic shit's in the plumbing. I'm assuming that's going to get resolved by the end of this season. It's just like, wow, that's happening at the same time. Everything with Lexus. They never pinpoint and say this, because I don't know if they're unaware. They're aware of so much of stuff, so I'm like, there's no way they're not aware of the entity. There's no way they're not aware of Cheryl. Like, all the shit she's doing, especially because she's tied to Leland and everything. Which also means, because jumping ahead a little bit, David was kind of acting like super suspicious about things, and, you know, he wanted nothing to do with that, and for a while, Kristen could tell, like, okay, something's up. Your secret calls, acting weird, kind of bailing in the middle of investigations. She ends up talking to him. The entity, what was his name? Vincent LeConte, ends up letting her into the room and tells her kind of what it is. But it's like, yeah, David doesn't want to help us with this whole thing, but now we're calling you in to help. So yeah, your daughter's being groomed to basically take over this. Kristen's like, what? I'm not a religious person. He's like, neither am I. He's like, I know it's funny to say that, but he's like, basically God kind of wants us to find the answers here on earth. And so he's like, I'm not very much of a spiritual person myself, which is kind of interesting. Him saying that. I don't even know whether to take that as fact and truth or whether that's just bullshit. He's just trying to like sway Kristen more on his side. But it's like, after hearing all this, she's like, I just want to go home and hug my daughter. And the guy was like, yo, you need to get her in line. And LeConte was like, yeah, you need to get her in line. And David's like, she's a mother. You're the one that needs to get in line. I'm like, yeah. And just like walks away. So now Kristen's brought into the fold. Well, I wonder will they eventually tell Ben or not. Because I love it. It's like, yeah, David, you and Kristen, and Kristen had to go, Ben? I'm like, why does that keep happening? Poor Ben. I'm like, really? Come on. Man gets no respect. No respect at all. God, what was I watching recently? Someone made a Rodney Dangerfield reference recently in something I was watching. I was like, why would you pick that? Because they were, I think it was like I was watching Only Murders in the Building, and someone made a reference to like, I was like, oh, you think you're Rodney Dangerfield? I'm like, she's a 20-something-year-old person, the character. I'm like, why would you make a reference to Rodney Dangerfield? I only know Rodney Dangerfield because of some of the movies he did, and also there was like the animated movie where he was a doll, but also just like, no respect at all. Like, that will always be ingrained in my head. Tangents aside, I just kind of like, I was like, all right, that made that like memory bubble to the top of my head. But yeah, like Ben just gets no respect, dude, and it's just like, yeah, every time you turn around, he's kind of getting shit on in some shape or form. Just all this wild stuff that's happening, and then other people just can't even like bother to fucking learn his name. Poor Ben. But then, like, you know, Kristen eventually goes home and she hugs her daughter. She gets in bed with Lexi and hugs her, and she's like, why do you smell like blood? And you know that, like, that look on Kristen's face just being like, ugh. And then like, kind of like, the fact is you can smell it. It's like, I wasn't even that, I was close to Ben. It's not like we hugged or anything, but you can smell it. That's weird. All the stuff I've heard about you. So she's definitely going to be keeping an even closer eye on Lexus now that she knows, like, right, this is, because they kept Leland in play because they were, you know, it's like, hey, keep your friends close, your enemies closer, right? But once again, how they must know about Cheryl. They have to know about everything with Andy, but they're choosing not. They're like, right, we're reeling them along. We're letting them think everything's copacetic, everything's good. They're getting away with anything. No, we know what you're up to. We're just choosing not to interfere, which also is kind of like, that kind of fucks over Kurt too, because it's like, you guys know so much, because they even know about Kristen and what she's seen and what she's been through, and it's like, yeah, everything is connected. It all goes back, like, everything Leland's ever done to your family has all been for the purpose of getting close to Lexus. So, but you know, speaking of Leland, he reaches out to Kurt, who reached out to his sister Andrea because he's trying to, his way to compensate with everything that he's kind of been through is, I'm going to write a book, you know, about, you know, him kind of coming to terms with what he saw last season. And, cause he was like, I know what I need to do. She's like, get baptized. He's like, nope, write a book. So, cause he's like, yeah, I've never had an epiphany in my life until now, until what I saw. So he's like, I'm going to need your help. And she was like, okay. I was like, she doesn't seem like she's on board with kind of like prophetizing and using religious elements to kind of write some story about. It doesn't seem like she's all that keen on that idea. But then she gave him some pamphlets. He's like, no, I need your help. And he's like, no, what I would tell you are in these pamphlets. Didn't help him. Leland gave him his card. I'm like, why would you work with Leland? You know everything Kristen's going through with that son of a bitch. You know who he is. And yet it's like, but I guess it's like, hey, you're desperate. Writer's block is like, yeah, quite a few writers recently have been making quite the deals with the devil. It's kind of interesting. Funny enough, on a Sunday, I mean, that is, I don't, you know, I'm so stupid. I never thought about the irony behind the fact is that this show airs on Sundays, and I guess that's kind of the point. They specifically were probably like, yo, either Paramount Plus was like, Paramount, CBS, Viacom, whoever, top dogs at the top of all this conglomerate, and just kind of like, oh, it'd be fun if we put that on Sundays. Or I don't know whether like the Kings, the ones, was it Robert and Michelle? they're the creators and writers of this. Well, they're like the main, like, I don't know if they're even the showrunners, but I would assume they are. They're the creators and probably like the head writers, and I'm sure like it's probably like a writer's room and stuff like that. But regardless, did they push for that? Like, once again, 2 seasons, and I've just never thought about that till now. Because I think the first season was on Thursdays, wasn't it? When it was on CBS in 2019? I think. Maybe I'm misremembering. Either way, kind of beside the point. Moot point. So, once again, my point was just like, right, with everything that's going on, Kurt, why would you work with Leland? Just kind of my main point. And Leland has him kind of go through like these rituals. So it's like, cool, light the candle, cut yourself. He's like, yeah, pour it on a page. He's like, Paige, I work off a laptop. He's like, well, put it on a laptop then. And play this record. He's like, but I don't have that turntable thing. He's like, well, get one then. No one ever said a writing process was going to be easy. And it's like, right, make sure you follow the order. Candle, blood, sing along to the song. And the moment he does, the imagery on that thing changes from a little girl like chasing after a bird with like, I think it was like a net or something in her hand, and then it turns into a hatchet, to her immediately butchering the bird, and his hand like turns demonic, his left hand in particular, and he's typing up a storm, but the mojo eventually wears off. And now this is where Leland is like, oh, you got a little taste, huh? It's like a drug dealer, but, you know, dealing in sin, of like, and evil. Like, oh, cool. You got a little taste. Your muse is gone. Oh, that's sad. You want to bring your muse back? Take these scissors. I was like, do you want him to cut himself or kill himself? Like, what are you going to do? It's like, oh, you just have to cut off all of Sister Andrea's hair. I'm like, he's like, I can't do that. It's like, no, go ahead, or you won't be able to get your muse back. So Kurt's going to consider it, which is sad because he likes Andrea, and it's like, right, she helped him, like, during that whole thing. He even said, like, right, you could have thrown me under the bus with the whole, like, what I saw last season, but you didn't. And, but once again, she wants him to kind of come to it in his own terms, because she knows he's in kind of crisis and free fall right now. She was trying not to, like, really throw him, like, really under the bus, because that would have just probably sent him spiraling even more, and she wants to be there to actually help and guide him, rather than kind of pushing him further away. So we'll see how this whole Kurt situation plays out. Everything with this whole Yeshua thing, whether it comes back or not, most likely won't, at least probably not for the rest of the season, but what kind of effect this had on Ben. Now, Kristen's aware of not only, like, the entity and that David's involved with them, but also they've got an eye on Lexus, that this is all about her, that she's being teed up to and groomed. She has to eventually find out about her mom. But once again, I find it interesting that the entity, like, did not tell her that. It's like, you guys know what Leland's up to all the time and everything. Well, you've kept him close, I guess, to keep an eye on him, but maybe you don't know. So I'm like, maybe you don't know about the Kurt thing. But I'd assume everyone in that circle of, like, Ben, David, Kristen, and probably maybe even Andrea and Kurt, everyone in that circle, they keep eyes on it, which I would assume would include Cheryl as well. But we'll ultimately have to wait and see where the hell the next episode takes us with all of this. We are trudging along. We're like near the end of the season. What, this episode 7? There's only, once again, I think there's only 10 episodes this season. There's 3 episodes left, so it's going to be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.